Selamat pagi.
Pagi Bu Noni,
Pagi,
Pagi,
Bu Noni.
Mbak Ririn, apa kabar? Ini kayaknya
Alhamdulillah
udah,
baik.
udah. Wah, ada Mas Asbas.
Pagi
Masih di
Prof
mute.
Nil, Putri, Pak
Background,
Budi,
Oh, ini
backgroundnya
kayaknya
dapat di mana?
Pak Pedi,
gimana, Mas?
Pak Agus.
Backgroundnya di mana dapatnya tuh?
Oh, ada dong.
Di mana dapat
Nah,
background?
tuh, ada dong.
Gimana cara dapatnya itu?
Pas dikirimin tuh,
Ah,
gua kirimin Bas.
seperti kirimin, Beh.
Ya,
Wah, Mas
di
Asbas.
PSP ya, gua kirim ya.
Download di chatroom, Bas.
Ya. Wah,
Mas.
udah ada Mas Budi. Ini sapa-sapa Indonesia dulu ini. Wah, pembicara
Ya,
kita
ini
juga udah ada. Good
saya
morning.
tiba-tiba
Ah,
tiba-tiba di dapur suruh buka ini sama Om Agus.
tinggal buka doang.
Gimana
Ayo
Saya
buka.
nutup Mbak Noni langsung ya. Saya ada bimbing seminar soalnya.
Kenapa
Ada
begitu?
Noni jangan
Apa?
berisik-berisik kali ah. Berisik
Eh,
kali kau.
gue lagi nyapa-nyapa itu gue tuh.
Iya.
Background.
Belum di mana dia adanya?
aku
Aduh,
nggak
ada
ditapa sama Noni.
Oh iya, iya.
Memang dia mah
siapa?
verifikasi.
Iya,
Enggak.
lihat dulu.
Ini ada wakil ketua kesayangan gue. Kesayangan kita ya. Salah.
Eh, kesayangan kita dong.
Good morning,
Prof
Nil.
Nel, maaf ya Prof.
Selamat pagi.
Pagi.
Pagi, Prof.
Oke, Prof.
Nel.
Lah, itu kenapa Mas Asbas berdua? Maksudnya apa?
Biar datang kompak.
Ah, begitu. Baik. Pak Fedi, apa kabar?
Baik, Mbak Noni.
Pak Budi, tolong backgroundnya ya.
Nggak ada. Di
Nggak
grup
ada
apa?
background, di mana
grup PSP,
dapetnya?
Pak.
Di grup PSP. Ih, gue so tahu.
Oh,
Iya,
oke.
betul.
Di chatroom ada, chatroom.
Di chat room Pak Budi.
Ya.
Chatroom
Room
juga ada
room
ya.
ini ya Zoom ya, bukan room yang lain. Tolong, maaf.
Mbak Noni nggak nyapa saya.
Iya.
Lapor, backgroundnya udah nih.
Lapor Mbak Noni lagi di jalan, bentar lagi ya.
Oh
Nggak
iya,
bisa
untuk
ganti
yang
background.
hati-hati di jalan ya. Yang di hati kapan jalan-jalan nih?
Iya, kapan-kapan. Kita ke Rio ya.
Ngopi dulu, ngopi, biar bener.
Oh iya, juga udah nih
Ayo,
ngopi.
Pak Budi, kita ngopi dulu.
Ya udah nih ngopi nih. Cie, segentong gue. Karena hari ini mau belajar. Ada Pak Nyoman, apa kabar? Siapa lagi nih? Gue sapa-sapa Indonesia dulu. Bu Yopi, tolong disapa-sapa Indonesia.
Nunggu yang diminum Mbak Noni mana? Kok nggak nyampe? Nah, itu dia, Pak.
Oh,
Cuma
perasaan Pak
pamer
Nyoman,
doang.
Pak Nyoman belum ganti ini background.
Mana?
Kasih
Oh iya ini.
Ini
Ini
kayaknya
background
IPB
apa ini?
kasih
Selamat
ini.
pagi, Pak Nyoman.
Pagi Pak Ferdi.
Pak Nyoman katanya mau jemput aku. Kok nggak jemput?
Kejauhan.
Oke.
Ya
Ini
paling enggak kalau Cengkareng gue jemput dah.
baiklah. Ini ada Mrs. Malati. Bener ya? Spellingnya Pak Thomas, apa kabar? Ada siapa ini? Pak Mas Mela, Pak Imron, ada Yulita Siahaan. Kayaknya nggak asing namanya. Siapa lagi nih?
Naruh background di mana ini?
Di awal Pak, di pendahuluan
Di chat
1.1
room, Pak. Di chat.
latar belakang background.
Cari dulu.
Ada Pak Fauzi Andika, ada yang dari Unhair, ada dari Sorong. Wah, ini udah bisa, Putri kayaknya kita di awal bisa nyanyi dari Sabang sampai Merauke.
Boleh.
Jadi udah boleh kita mulai? Wah, udah boleh dimulai, Bu?
Baik, Bu Yurmami ini. Assalamualaikum Bapak Ibu semua. Akan dibuka sama Bu Noni. Silakan Bu Noni.
Kita bahasa Indonesia kan, Bu?
Bahasa Inggris.
Itu untuk ketua aja. Kalau kita pakai bahasa Indonesia aja, Prof. Neil, it's okay. Prof. Neil?
Yap.
Ya.
Oh, good.
Ya. Ini pengantarnya in bahasa ya.
Ya,
Oke, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Eh, Selamat pagi, salam sejahtera untuk kita semua. Mudah-mudahan hari ini kita diberi kesehatan, kebahagiaan, sehingga kita semua bisa mengikuti webinar dari FK2PT hingga selesai. Terima kasih untuk teman-teman yang sudah bersedia meluangkan waktu untuk hadir di seminar pada pagi hari ini. Eh, yang kami hormati Ketua FK2PT yang pada saat ini diwakilkan oleh Wakil Ketua FK2PT yang saya sayangi, Pak Budi Hascaryo. Bu Yopi, tolong maaf ya. Kemudian yang kami hormati narasumber yang pastinya sangat luar biasa, yang sudah bersedia berbagi ilmu kepada kami pada hari ini. Prof. Neil dan Mbak Intan, ya, dan terutama teman-teman yang sudah hadir pada webinar pada pagi hari ini dari berbagai universitas di seluruh Indonesia. Sekali lagi kami ucapkan selamat datang di webinar seri diskusi Forum Komunikasi Perguruan Tinggi Forum Komunikasi Konsorsium dan salah FK2PT dengan tema Ecosystem Based Fisheries Management Benchmark for Fisheries Ecosystem Assessment. Jadi webinar kali ini merupakan bagian dari upaya kita untuk memperkuat pengelolaan perikanan berbasis ekosistem sebagai pendekatan ilmiah dan praktis untuk menjaga keberlanjutan sumber daya perikanan Indonesia. Dan hari ini sebenarnya adalah edisi khusus ya, Prof. Tri, karena biasanya kita itu per 2 bulan, tapi karena kesediaan dari kedua pembicara kita yang luar biasa ini, sehingga webinar pada hari ini kita laksanakan. Dan selanjutnya, untuk mempercerah dan menerangi hari ini, gitu ya, kita punya webinar. Kita pengen dulu ada sambutan sepatah dua patah kata, tapi jangan sampai patah-patah, Mas Budi, dari Wakil Ketua FK2PT kepada Mas Budi tersayang, disilahkan.
Terima kasih Mbak Noni, thank you very much. Ibu, aduh, your full name I always forget, but I always call you Noni. Thank you very much, Bu Noni. Ladies and gentlemen, Prof. Neil from Murdoch University, Ibu Intan from Rekam Foundation as a manager of Fisheries Resource Center of Indonesia in Rekam Foundation. Dr. Asbas Torusman, our moderator, lecturer and researchers from Department of Fisheries Resources, Utilization, IPB University as moderator today. And Ibu Noni, Dr. Ersti Yuli Kasari, our host today. She is lecturer and researchers from Rio University, member of FK2PT. Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Budi Hascar Iskandar. I am a vice of chairman in FK2PT. This morning, Pak Agus, as our chairman, called me and he said that he is in traveling from Java to Jakarta by train. So he asked me to open this webinar. That's why I allow me to read what his message that he sent to me in this opening. Well, this webinar is one of collaboration among FK2PT, Iceland Fisheries Society, Rekam Nusantara Foundation, and Department of Fisheries Resources Utilization, IPB University. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all today in this seminar on ecosystem-based fisheries management for capture fisheries. And if I'm not mistaken, since 2009, it is also in the KKP or Fisheries Agency of Indonesia. They also introduce ecosystem approach for fisheries management. So AIFM, and this is EBFM. I don't know, maybe future ECFM, A, B, and C. Sorry, just kidding. So we are honored to have such a distinguished group of participants, researchers, fisheries manager, policymaker, and stakeholder, all committed to advancing sustainable fisheries. Today, we will explore how innovative scientific tools and approach are shaping the future of fisheries management. Specifically, source person and member of research team will be share insight on how ecosystem indicators identified through our previous project called benchmark for ecosystem assessment, now being utilized to align current fisheries management practices with the principle of EBFM. Fisheries are vital to the livelihood, food security, and economies of communities worldwide. In a region like Saleh Bay, Nusa Tenggara Barat, Indonesia, small-scale and commercial fisheries are the backbone of local livelihood. However, these fisheries face complex challenges, including overfishing, habitat degradation, and climate change impact. Ecosystem-based fisheries management offer a holistic approach, considering the entire ecosystem, including ecological, social, and economic factors, to ensure the sustainability of fisheries and their ecosystem. Over the past year, the research over the past year, the research team has worked diligently to develop and identify a specific ecosystem indicator that serve as benchmark for assessing the health and resilience of marine ecosystem in Saleh Bay. This indicator include measures of biodiversity, habitat integrity, predator-prey relationship, and environmental condition. Then we hope that this session will foster fruitful discussion, inspire collaborative effort, and promote the adoption of ecosystem-based approach in fisheries management. Our goal is to support policymakers and stakeholders in implementing adaptive science, science-driven strategies and balance ecological integrity with socio-economic needs. Once again, thank you for joining us today. We look forward to an engage a session filled with valuable insight and shared experiences. Let us work together to save our marine ecosystem for sustainable livelihood for future generation. And I would like to thanks to Professor Neil from Murdoch University with the topic of advancing ecosystem-based fisheries management or EBFM as a concept and application for multi-species fisheries. And then Ibu Intan Destianis Hartati with the topic of study of ecosystem-based fisheries management EBFM in Indonesia, a case study in Saleh Bay. So between the concept and the implementation, it is we can elaborate in this webinar. Thank you very much for uh, Dr. Asbas as moderator and also Dr. Noni as host. And to all participants, we hope we will have a fruitful discussion in this webinar. Thank you very much and regards from our chair, Mr. Agus Suherman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mas Budi. Okay, next we will move on the main presentation session featuring two distinguished speakers, Prof. Neil and Ms. Intan, where each speaker will deliver a 30-minute presentation moderated by Dr. Asbas Tarusman, who will also facilitate the discussion session that follows. But before we begin the presentation, allow me to read the CV of our moderator this morning. Dan satu lagi, kenapa saya jadi MC hari ini, karena Saleh Bey ya, dan nama bapakku adalah Saleh, sebagai informasi. Gue juga baru tahu kalau bapak gue punya itu. Baik, our moderator for today, Asbas Taurusman, yang saat ini menjabat sebagai dosen dan pastinya peneliti di FPIK IPB. Jadi beliau meraih gelar sarjananya di IPB dengan gelar doktor di bidang ekologi laut dan oceanografi dari CAU Kiel University. Mas Asbas, aku taunya Kiel itu adalah merek kosmetik gitu ya. Ternyata Kiel University Jerman. Mungkin kalau pakai Mas Asbas nanti kalau aku beli-beli lagi bisa diskon kali ya. Kepakarannya mencakup pengelolaan perikanan berkelanjutan, EBFM, ekologi, dan manajemen pesisir, serta integrasi konservasi laut dan perikanan. Pastinya beliau ini sangat aktif baik di nasional maupun internasional. Ya, keterlibatan beliau ini banyak banget gitu ya dalam beberapa pembuatan dokumen, proyek dokumen, rencana pengelolaan, LPPWPP, Harvest Strategi Perikanan, dan pastinya pengembangan kawasan konservasi laut. Dan beliau juga banyak terlibat, wow, ini di dalam proyek-proyek dan kerjasama lembaga internasional, FAO, UNDP, USAID, WCS, YIKAN, dan terutama untuk KKP ya pastinya untuk di nasionalnya. Beliau nih juga menjadi salah satu narasumber dan kemudian sebagai konsultan. Nanti konsultannya didescribe lebih ini ya Mas ya, konsultan apa aja ini gitu ya, konsultan untuk curhat-curhat kah. Dan kemudian beliau adalah penulis aktif dalam puluhan publikasi ilmiah di bidang perikanan dan lingkungan laut. Baik untuk tidak apa namanya dan untuk tidak membuang-buang waktu gitu ya, untuk selanjutnya kita serahkan layar ini sepenuhnya ke Mas Asbas. Kepada Mas Asbas kami persilakan.
Terima kasih, Bu Noni. Thank you very much. Bu Noni is the representative of FK2PT and also Dr. Budi Pascaryo as the chair of FK2PT this morning. Thank you very much. And also, Bapak dan Ibu, ladies and gentlemen, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Very privileged today. We have Professor Neil here with us. We can discuss about the ecosystem-based fisheries management, benchmarks for fisheries ecosystem assessment. We have been familiar with the ecosystem approach to fisheries management since 2010. Actually, Indonesia already implement the EBFM, particularly for formulating fisheries, and also we use the indicator of says the management status of fisheries in some area in Indonesia. Today, we discuss in little bit detail concept and how EBFM implemented in the multi-species fisheries, particularly in certain area in Saleh Bay. As Bu Noni introduced, I'm Asbas. I'm Bimo, your moderator today. Thank you very much for joining us from various locations in Indonesia, from Aceh to Papua. Yeah, in this session, we start with Pak Neil. Will introduce to us what the concept of EBFM, how it implemented, and later on we discuss in detail what this concept and how implemented. And then after Pak Neil, Mbak Intan, actually researcher in the Fisheries Research Center of Indonesia, FRCI, and also researcher in Rekam Nusantara Foundation. Yeah. Mbak Intan also currently graduate student in marine fisheries technology in IPB. Before Pak Neil continue to present, I would like to introduce Pak Neil. This is important for us. Professor Neil Renegan, Professor of Marine Ecology and Conservation at Murdoch University in Western Australia, and also Anil, yeah, double. Anil also currently, sorry, this some. Okay, Anil is currently a young professor in IPB University. He is a very high academic reputation. Anil has published more than 200 publications now with the Scopus Index 52. Oh. Yeah, the expert panel is fisheries ecology, marine ecology, and also actively involved in the project in CSIRO in the last 14 years. And he also still director of Center for Fisheries and Aquatic Ecosystem Research. Anil already supervised 25 PhD students. UD, one of them, now is currently present with us. And also editor-in-chief of ASEAN Fisheries Science Journal. I think our presenter panel, and please, floor is for you.
Thank you, Prof. Aspas, and thank you to the organisers of this meeting for the chance to be involved in this important discussion about ecosystem-based fisheries management. Now, I'm just going to see how we go sharing my screen and start the presentation. Okay, so hopefully that my presentation is showing for everyone. Yes, that looks good. Thank you. So I'll be talking about how we can move to ecosystem-based fisheries management and give a background to the development of this concept, as well as providing the background for this newly developed techniques, the structural indicators, which provide information for ecosystem-based fisheries management. And this part of the presentation is work that has been led by Beth Fulton and Keith Sainsbury, and I acknowledge their contributions to the material that I'll be presenting. Before starting, in Australia, we have a tradition of acknowledging the country on which we work and the First Nations people who have been on that land for 60,000 years. And Murdoch University sits on the land of the Whadjuk and Binjarra people of the Noongar Nation, who have a history of environmental stewardship and conservation, as well as learning on the grounds on which I work at Murdoch. And I'm very proud to continue that tradition of environmental stewardship and learning on those grounds. In terms of what I will cover today is give a brief outline of the global importance of Asian and Indonesian capture fisheries. Then I'll give an overview of how fisheries management have progressed from single species through to ecosystem-based fisheries management. And as Prof. Aspas has said, Indonesia has been in that ecosystem approaches to fisheries since 2010 for quite some time. The third component is the component in which I will be using material provided by Beth Fulton to talk about these new structural indicators that have been developed by Beth and Keith in a working group over a 5-year period. And the sorts of indicators we'll look at is changes in catch composition through time, how we identify ecologically significant species, and they're referred to as hub and keystone species, how we measure the resilience in the system, how the system can cope with additional pressures on it, and then an index termed the Ecological Traits Index, which summarizes all that information into one index that provides a cue for managers to think about action, and then sum up the presentation. Before we go there, just to give you an Australian's view of the world, I come from Perth on the west coast, which is about a 5-hour flight from Sydney. Australia has a population of 27 million spread across a very large area. And if you compare that with a population of about 270 people and how we manage fisheries. This shows the latest report from the FAO in 2024 on the state of fisheries and aquaculture globally. And so this uses information that is provided by the nations and shows the significance of China and Indonesia for capture fisheries in providing marine seafood and marine production. So China, number 1, Indonesia, number 2 in terms of landing. Our whole region is very significant. There's 5 nations in the Asia Pacific in the top 10 countries by landings, and also Thailand and Malaysia are very important. They're within the top 15 to 20 nations by landing. And if we look at the number of people involved, we have the largest fleet in the world based in the Asia Pacific of about 3.5 million vessels, or over 75% of the global fleet. We also have a very significant number of small-scale fisheries in the region. These are fisheries that are important for livelihoods and nutrition and involve small vessels and limited technology in using the fishing gear. And the catches and fishing effort in these fisheries are often unreported. There's been attempts to try and estimate the scale of these catches, and one attempt which was to reconstruct catches for Cam Island and Vietnam by taking the underreported catch shown in the light grey here. And you can see that that's of the same order of magnitude as the reported catch to the FAO. So in terms of small-scale fisheries, we can look at doubling an idea of what might be actually taken. And this makes the assessment and management of small-scale fisheries very challenging. In recognition of the significance of Asian fisheries, the FAO asked me to convene a workshop in Bangkok in 2023 to look at the current status of Asian fish stocks and how they're assessed in the region, and also the potential for a network of people, of practitioners in stock assessment within the region. At this workshop, 10 country assessments were presented, the exclusive economic zone of these 10 different countries. There were 10 assessments presented with at a smaller spatial scale. And we also had working groups on small to medium pelagics, reef fish, and demersal species. For the sorts of species that we looked at in this workshop, in the small to medium pelagic groups with the hillfish, the mackerel, shad, and barley sardine. We looked at a number of species of groper, the coral leopard groper shown here, and demersal species like the blue swimmer crab. So from that workshop, we found that virtually all stocks were either fully or overexploited, which is very similar to the assessments completed by the FAO for the region. we saw that there were some success stories in terms of recovering overexploited fisheries. And an example of this was the blue swimmer crab fishery in Sri Lanka, where gear restrictions were brought in so that they could only catch using gill nets with a large mesh size, and also size limits were introduced. And this led to a recovery in the spawning stocks, as indicated by the spawning potential ratio. The data collection and measurement programs within the region were very impressive. And also the capacity of people. People were applying fast, current and emerging methods, and there was good technical work being done, and there was a lot of enthusiasm for applying stock assessment research. The gaps or areas that were identified at that workshop were that we had no ecosystem assessments presented from the region by people in the region, and that's why this webinar is quite important, and the work that's been done in Tuluk Sala. We didn't have any social indicators for fisheries, but it was acknowledged that these were important in terms of how management decisions were made. And it was also recognised that we needed to improve how we communicated and worked with managers, policymakers, fishers and the fishing industry. In terms of work in Indonesia, Prof. Indra Jaya presented the national status. The assessments are considered by the National Commission for Fisheries Resource Assessment and reported to the Ministry for Marine Affairs and Fisheries. We have 11 fisheries management areas in the Indonesian archipelago and 9 species groups, so that's a lot of assessments, 90, nearly 100 assessments for the whole of Indonesia at that level. And the assessments are made using biomass dynamic models and hydroacoustic estimators, and we have indicators of biomass over biomass at the maximum sustainable yield and fishing mortality divided over the fishing mortality at maximum sustainable yield. And again, most stocks were at a state of full exploitation or over exploitation. We also had 3 regional assessments presented at the workshop, or 3 assessments at smaller levels. So one was work on mackerel scad in the Kilimanjaro Islands, where the data and information collection and analysis been done by WCS, which is now an Indonesian NGO, and Ryan Prasetya presented to the workshop. We had a presentation on coral leopard grouper on Tuluk Sala by Irfan Yulianto, and we also had a presentation on 4 Plectrophoma species in Kalimanjaro by Ryan. These assessments were for fisheries with very limited data, so there was no history of catch or fishing effort, and so data Liffingen methods were used, the length-based assessments to estimate spawning potential ratio, and with its target spawning potential ratio of 0.3, and a fisheries mortality to natural mortality ratio target of around 1. We also, from the length-based assessments, can look at how the length of selectivity in the fishery compares with the length at maturity for the species, and ideally we want our length at selectivity to at least the size at the length at maturity. So from that work, mackerel scad were assessed to be overfished, and that overfishing is occurring, and that within the coral leopard grouper group, the stocks had been overfished, and there was various levels of overfishing occurring. That's very much about single species assessment. In terms of fisheries management, in the 1960s, the focus was virtually entirely on single species and maximising the sustainable yield from a fishery. This concept of MSY was something we attempted to achieve. Through the 1980s, this changed to looking at the sustainable production system so that we had fisheries and the fishing industry being sustained. But again, we're talking about a single species approach and single fisheries. Through the 1990s, Australian sustainable development for fisheries, which meant we looked at fisheries, but we considered the broader ecology of the system. But again, it was still very much a single species approach. And then in the 2000s, we saw this movement from ecosystem approaches to fisheries, or EAF, to ecosystem-based fisheries management. What's caused this push to ecosystem-based fisheries management? There's been a number of factors that have led to this. One of the major factors is a requirement for independent certification of fisheries requires that ecosystem-based assessments are completed, such as the Marine Stewardship Council certification, or MSC. It's often required that we get further information from fisheries improvement plans, and with the UN Sustainable Goal 14, we're talking about conserving and sustainably using the oceans, so we need to understand ecosystems. But when we look at a fishery operating within the broader ecosystem, this question of what component should we include becomes challenging. At the time of single species assessments and estimating maximum sustainable yield, that was relatively simple. But when we look to the broader ecosystem, how do we do this? In Australia, the components of the EBFM, and this is pretty universal globally, but different names may be used. We talk about in Western Australia ecological components, which consist of target species and non-target fishery species within the ecosystem, socioeconomic outcomes, and governance, which is how successful we are system, how much compliance, how do fishers comply with the legislation, what legislation is in place. I just now want to shift to giving an example of how we shift from single species to an ecosystem approach to fisheries using a system that I'm quite familiar with, which is the Exmouth Gulf prawn or shrimp trawl fishery. The Exmouth Gulf is located about 1,000 kilometres north of Perth. It's a system in which there's a lot of controls within the system. It's limited entry so that licenses are required, which constrains the number of fishers. There's restrictions on the gear in terms of trawl mesh size that can be used. And there's closed areas for small prawns. This area in blue lining the coast here is entirely closed for trawling. And then there's closed seasons within the fishery to protect the larger prawns or the spawners. It's also a data-rich fishery. We have data from the start of the fishery, from compulsory logbooks by the fishers. We also have fishery-independent data to understand the number of small prawns coming into the system, or recruits, and the number of large prawns or spawners that we have, and we also have information on the habitats of the juvenile. In shifting to an ecosystem approach for a single species, it's important to consider the whole of the life cycle of the species. So this is the life cycle for one of the target species, the brown tiger prawn, Penaeus esculentus, in Exmouth Gulf. You see the spawning adults release the fertilized eggs in the offshore waters. The eggs then develop through a number of larval stages from the nucleus to the zoe to the mysis, and as they develop, they are also moved inshore by the currents, and then they metamorphose into the first post-larval stage, which is the first benthic stage, and the first stage that really looks something like a larger prawn or shrimp. Now, within this inshore area, there's very specific habitats for the different species of prawns, and for the brown tiger prawn, Penaeus esculentus, seagrass and macroalgae are the critical nursery habitat. So no seagrass or macroalgae, there's no habitat for the juveniles. This shows the history of landings and fishing effort within the fishery. So the landings are shown in the black histograms in tonnes, and the fishing effort, nominal fishing effort, is shown in hours of trawling by the solid line here. And the peak catch was over 1,200 tonnes, and the peak trawling effort was 50,000 hours of trawling. And so now there's only 5 to 10 vessels operating, which is down from 28 vessels, and only 20,000 hours of trawling. There's 2 significant time points on this graph. The first one of these is a major collapse in the fishery, and this was due to overfishing, and the fishery was closed, so no fishing allowed, and you can see that the fishery recovered, but to a lower level of production, and this was due to management controls to limit closed areas and closed seasons. The second major point, the decline in the fishery, was one due to a cyclone. So Cyclone Vance went down right down the middle of Exmouth Gulf and turned over the sediments, reduced the seagrass cover to virtually to less than 2% within the Gulf. So there was no habitats for the juveniles to recruit to. But you can see that the production recovered as the seagrass recovered in this system. This still doesn't give us an understanding of food webs and ecosystems, but it's a significant advance of what we had before we had the information about the importance of those habitats to the juvenile stages. And so we had data from a number of sources that have helped identify the significance of habitats for the production within this fishery, as well as the significance of understanding how much fishing capacity and how much fishing effort is in the fishery. And the question then comes, how do we get this understanding on food webs, and what other information do we need to look at to move to an ecosystem-based fisheries management? And in Southeast Asia, in the region, people are really important to mention and understand. So, for example, in Western Peninsular Malaysia, where we have 200 kilometres of coastline, there's something like 2,000 boats, trawlers operating in that system, fishing for shrimp as well as fish. There's also shrimp, some illegal fishing methods, such as nets set on the tide.